What's up, juniors, seniors? Mr. Brickwood here. We are closing down on the last week, 2 weeks of school. This will be, if not the last, but one of the last lectures we'll have here in Psych. Now, looking at this lecture, this is going to be called Everyday Social Psychology, just things that we have. We're going to look at fallacies, we're going to look at biases, we're going to look at effects, we're going to look at just some of it will be a review of what we've already talked about on the year, and yeah, there's just a lot of stuff I found fascinating that I'm looking forward to sharing with you in this presentation. I'll be jumping back and forth over here, checking out this screen, just because sometimes this doesn't record the way I'd like to, and I don't find out until I'm all the way done. I have to redo it. So anyhow, looking at everyday psychology, we just need to remind ourselves some things. First off, according to Freud, according to a lot of psychologists, actually all of them, I mean, our brain consumes 20% of our energy, even though it only makes up about 3% of our weight. And because it's an energy hog, it wants to oftentimes take the path of least resistance. A lot of our things are done unconsciously. We don't really think about them. We're on autopilot. We're not always engaged. And, we only engage, a limited amount of time throughout the day. Sometimes at different points because, again, we're trying to conserve energy, and that brain is trying to do that. And a lot of this stuff, again, we're going to talk about is labels from psychologists. You could argue there's two sides to all this stuff. A lot of this stuff is theory. But again, I find it fascinating. It's also something to kind of think about. But again, be critical, question these things you're going to hear in this lecture. This is just, I'm pulling this from the AP Psych, pulling this from an array of sources, Simply Psychology, to Elephant in the Brain, to You're Not So Smart, to You're Now Less Dumb. There's a lot of different psych books I've kind of come across. I'm kind of just inserted stuff I thought was fascinating out of there. Now, we need to remind ourselves we are so complex, and we have these elephant-sized motives, but the brain wants to act out of self-interest. It's self-preservation. Again, going back to the beginning, we want to expand, spread our genes in the future. We want to survive, and this is why we kind of react instinctually to protect ourselves. But at the same time, we don't want to appear too selfish. So even though we're selfish, we don't want to appear selfish because it's self-deception. We're going to even deceive ourselves, because if we don't deceive ourselves, other people are going to pick up on those cues. And this is a big thing. So a lot of our stuff is, we are somewhat strangers to ourselves, because our brain doesn't want to tell us everything, because if it tells us everything we think, then other people are going to pick up that we think those things. And, again, it's that brain kind of protecting ourselves, but we have these motives and we have these self-interests. And again, we remind ourselves, our brain, it does want to take the path of least resistance. And you need to remind yourself going on the next step of your life, whether you're going to be a senior, you're going to be, off to college, or going off to workforce, whatever you may be, going off to military, going to get trade. Remind yourself that you want to procrastinate, you want to sit, you don't want to do anything. That's what your brain, it wants to just rest. And we got to remind ourselves, because the brain takes a path of least resistance, we got to question things. We got to get up and move. When you first see that source, the first source you read, you're going to be impacted by. You're going to think that's what's truth. We need to question those things, because again, your brain wants to take that path of least resistance. Just remind yourself of that. It's natural to do that. My kids, 8, 6, 2, I know they're going to do that. And again, I don't want to scream at them whenever they try to take shortcuts, because I know that's natural. That's what they want to do. And it's fitting for being human. It's part of being human. So it's something we need to work out of. Again, we need to be conscious of. So we know that, when we're trying to hold ourselves back, we need to move forward. We need to get ourselves out into that uncomfort zones, push ourselves through those seemingly limits. So, again, you don't really want to think critically, because it takes harder work. But again, you want to think critically, because it's going to make you better. And then we look at, because your brain takes path of least resistance, this is why priming works. And we can look at, this is like an unnoticed image or word that reaches through your visual cortex, or your eyes, and it actually will prime you for a response later on. And that's what I talked about. If you're meeting somebody new, drink hot coffee, and you're priming the brain. When they're touching that warm mug, they are finding you warm. And again, it's studies reinforce that, and it's not going to work all the time. But again, you just have that You're priming the brain with that warm cup of coffee. I told you folks, if you're taking a test and I put some eyes, picture of eyes in the room, and I leave the room, you'll still be primed to think you're being watched. Now you wouldn't know. Now you wouldn't, because I just told you. But this is what the priming does. So we want to put ourselves in situations which are going to prime us to bring out favorable conditions in us. So this is why setting your room up a certain way. A lot of innovative companies, they have certain the rooms that foster that creativity and innovation, because they're priming the brain when you walk in that room that you're in this creative zone. And again, it's kind of turning the brain on. It's engage mode. Going back to that point that our brains are wired to act in self-interest. We kind of hide these things from us. We deceive ourselves, and we have this moral reasoning comes from our brain's press secretary, essentially, where the press secretary is saying what's going on in the White House. They're filtering things. They're stretching the truth, and we do the same thing. And we can look into the runaway trolley experiment. Going back to that. That would be moral reasoning, when you save 4 people by killing 1, and that study that they did with that. Now, going back to also psych things we talked about, remind yourself that you always tell yourselves a story. And stories kind of move us, but they define us too. And you got to be careful. What does your story say? What are you saying about yourself? When you walk in a room, when you wake up, when you're doing something, what are you saying about yourself? Are you tearing yourself down? Or are you building yourself up? And we got to remind ourselves stories are inspiring. We love stories, and this is anecdotes are moving. We can look at numbers, science, and math. We've talked about this. Numbers don't do it for us, but when we bring those stories alive, when we bring those numbers alive, we tell individuals, we gravitate towards that. But we got to be careful when we hear a story, this anecdotal, as you would say, a story. It's anecdotal. We got to be careful when we hear this story and we think it's true. Every time you go on that street, you're going to get mugged, or that if you do this, you're going to get cancer. Again, we have to look into the facts. We got to look at the numbers. What do the numbers say? Because our brain wants to act, irrationally, and we react more than we actually think critically, because our brain wants to take that path of least resistance. Now, speaking of paths, you guys ever drive down the highway? And you're driving down the highway and you're driving for quite some time. You're like, whoa, I forgot. I haven't been paying attention for the last 10 minutes. That's just called highway hypnosis. I just want to make sure, and this is you reacting to things correctly without consciously thinking about them. It's just reinforcing how our brains operate unconsciously. It's that highway hypnosis. We talked about this, looking at sensory adaptation, or adaptation, in the sense of, our senses adapt to our environment. If you have, a constant train car, you're living in the city, it's traveling outside your window, eventually it's just going to be, you'll be used to it. It'll be second nature. If there's a tap like this, it'd be annoying. I know this is annoying. Over time, you block it out. You ignore it. And we just, our senses, whether it's the taste, or it's the touch, or it's the sound, or the see, you just block things out. We adapt to, our senses adapt to it. You get in the cold water, it turns, in a pool, it warms up over time. So this is our senses adapting and reinforcing that. Another thing we talked about in psych this year was habituation, which is just reinforcing how the more you put yourself out there, the more you go out in the uncomfortable zones, the more comfortable you get in it. It becomes habit. It's habituation. And it goes back to that Calvin Coolidge story. Whenever he was a kid, he was terrified to go out and meet new people through his mother's kitchen door. When strangers came in, his palms would get sweaty. He didn't think he could do it. And eventually he said, if I ever want to do anything, I got to be able to go shake that person's hand. I got to go walk through that door. And he would walk through the door. And over time, habituation kicked in. He realized it wasn't so scary. It wasn't so bad. This is why I had you guys do those elevator speeches, go up in front of the room and talk, because I want you out of your comfort zone. And this is looking at habituation, and how the more you do something, the easier it gets. With the psych, with the mind. Remind yourself that we're irrational. Human beings are not rational. We overfeel, we underthink. You're not logical. Remind yourself that. Some of us are more logical than others. But we all use emotion, and emotion is irrational. And we're emotional creatures, and the more you remind yourself that, Again, the more you prepare yourself and put up defenses against being irrational. And then we have Bacon here. He says human understanding from its peculiar nature easily supposes a greater degree of order and equality in things than it really finds, and just reinforces the fact that we think we understand, we think things go in a certain order, but the world is chaos oftentimes. I mean, there's just chaos. And we need to remind ourselves of that. And we look also, looking at Psych, first impressions. These are amazing. These are so impactful. Whether you're looking at Amazon, you're looking at the reviews underneath, that first review will impact more so than any other review you meet. It's that first impression. When you meet somebody, it's a first impression, and it's something that really sticks. It's tough to, break away from when you're looking at that. And again, we're looking at these first impressions. One of the problems with first impressions, if they're good, we call it the halo effect. And we think that because they were good once, they're good all the time. We think because they're good at one thing, they're good at everything. And this halo effect is this it pollutes our judgment. It's something that again is irrational, and it's just people who make a good first impression get put in this halo effect. So they have like a longer leash to make mistakes. And this is just looking at why first impressions they carry so much weight, because we come with that halo effect. And we're going to look at other effects as we go on. Again, going back to the halo effect, or going back to how we try to put order in things, you're looking at, we oversimplify things as good and evil. And that goes back to Francis Bacon. We try to put things nice and neat. That person's good, that person's evil. That person's smart, that person's dumb. And we try to simplify things in black and white when there's 50 shades of gray. And we also, looking at the good and evil, trying to justify, we look at this idea that people are poor because they deserve it. The people are rich because they deserve it. And this is looking at Psych, and we think we falsely believe that people tend to get what they deserve. And that's true sometimes. I mean, you do get what you deserve sometimes. But at the same time, it's not all the time. And it's too simple to explain poverty as just because he made bad choices and she made good choices, she's on a yacht. So this is just looking at that. And we have this just reinforces this just world fallacy, that we think that the world is just. So I'll be looking at fallacies, I'll be looking at biases, I'll be looking at effects from Psych that are everyday things that I just think are cool to know. But this just world fallacy is that belief that we think people get what they deserve. And the reason being is because we love heuristics. This goes back to the mind want to take these mental shortcuts. We want to take the path of least resistance. These heuristics are just snap, quick decision, boom, boom, boom. That person's this, that person's that. This is why we all judge. We all judge. You're guilty of judging. You can say, I don't judge people. Bull, you're human. Okay, that's garbage. Now we look at this. Heuristics is that mental shortcut. Those cognitive is thinking. Those thinking shortcuts we make. We're trying to make snap decisions. That person's safe. That person's dangerous. That person's this, that person's that. So this is heuristics. This is where we have these. We have effect heuristics, which is this tendency to make poor decisions and ignore odds and go with your intuition, your gut. This effect heuristic, how I feel. How I feel is how I'm going to decide whether or not I'm going to do that or not. We looked at that Civil War Union commander John Sedgwick when he says all these Confederate rebels are popping sniper shots at the Union soldiers outside of what battle was that? I cannot remember off the top of my head the battle. But he says, "Hey guys, what are you ducking for? They couldn't hit an elephant from this distance." And then like second later, boom, bullet hits him right in the head. Turns, falls dead. And we look at this effect heuristics. He's not understanding that his intuition is getting him killed. His effect heuristics, his maybe based off his past experiences, make him feel not so scared because he's had other snipers shooting at him or shooting at his soldiers before. So this mental shortcut gets him killed. So we have to look at the same thing in the psych world with these effect heuristics, and this is how they operate. Another heuristic we're looking at would be availability heuristics. Now this is availability heuristics, just looking at what have you listened to lately? What have you read? If you're sitting on a beach and you're reading a newspaper and it says shark attack took place, I don't know, you're in Myrtle Beach, but took place in Florida, you may look at that and say, oh my gosh, shark attacks are on the rise. Shark attacks are on the rise. Or you could be in Myrtle Beach, a shark attack, and you think, oh my gosh, sharks are attacking everybody. And whatever you are closest to, you think, oh my gosh. If exposed to information that's recent, this availability heuristic, your mind goes right to it. Now you think that, oh my gosh, I'm not getting in that ocean. And that's that availability heuristic. Now we need to remind ourselves, again, we're irrational. We are all insecure. We don't want to show this, though. And, we can look at people in the past, whether it's Marilyn Monroe on the left here, or Jackie Kennedy's husband after JFK, after he got assassinated, Aristotle Onassis, wealthiest man in the whole world. Dude was insecure. He was miserable. Marilyn Monroe, insecure. And we know how her life ended tragically. Whether you think there's conspiracy there or not, we look at insecurities are something human beings have to face up to, and we have to find ways to improve and lower inhibitions, lower insecurities, so we can be confident and get through a day. Remind yourself we're all flawed. We're all flawed. We all have our flaws, and it's okay. It's okay. Don't take things personally because other people say something to you. Don't think that you're the only one that has flaws. We all have them, and just don't let other people validate what you are, what you believe. Remind yourself, we are from our ancestor. Evolutionary psychologists argue we make decisions today in a modern world, based off of biologically our past ancestors who lived in a much different life. Those traits that passed down have not kept pace with the Industrial Revolution, with the changes that happen in modernization, with the modern world we live in. And that, biologically, we're no longer prepared for the world that exists. Like that, the world that used to exist is no longer here. We have this new world, and we have to adapt to it. This is why we love sweets and fats, because they prepared our ancestors to survive famine, because it was feast and famine. You either had a lot of food at once, and then you didn't have any food for a while. They had a lot of food at once. So biologically, this is why we crave the sweets and the sugars. And our brain wants that sugar, wants that glucose, wants to enter the brain, get it fired up. So this is why we crave this stuff. So we have this evolutionary mismatch from way ancestors used to be to where we are today. And that's just kind of remind yourself of that. Human beings have been around for 200,000 years. And, really, in the last 150, we've seen a ton of changes. Really, you could argue the last 250. But it's not really that long in a scheme of things. As I mentioned, glucose, this is something that the brain wants more of. This is where you get that sugar. And then we look at also, the body, it's storing fat for good reason. It's stored energy. And, high-calorie fuel reserves can carry you through periods with food scarcity. And that's what our ancestors had to deal with. So, for centuries, the spare tire that I have around my stomach right now was like an energy storehouse. Nowadays, we're trying to lose that fat, right? And we have these shows like The Biggest Loser and different things. And we have weight loss, we have this misconception of weight loss. It's not just a matter of a lack of willpower. Genes do matter. If you look at weight, it's really three big factors. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating healthy? And then your genes, right? Or four, I should say, and exercise. So these things matter, right? They matter in weight loss, but genes play a role, and we can see that different people are able to eat whatever they want and not gain weight, and other people, it's something that they just gain weight. And you're looking at I'm actually going to skip this. It's just looking at fat cells, and we have 30 to 40 billion fat cells in a typical adult, and this can swell in heavier people. Speaking of gaining weight, just weight and eating, just some things to think about. Do not grocery shop when you're hungry in the next stage of your life. You will see snacks as something you want now, and will want tomorrow as well. And when tomorrow comes around, you realize I don't want it. Then you kind of waste that money, and you spend more money, and you have that food lying around. As we've talked about, it's not about being self-disciplined. It's about not having that stuff setting in front of you. Changing the Carbs in food, they help boost levels of neurotransmitters of serotonin, which has a calming effect to us. That's why we tend to eat when we're depressed sometimes. We're trying to get some kind of chemicals on the brain, makes us feel better. We have this preference for sweet and salty tastes. And, we look at spices. I just thought there's some interesting things. Spices are most commonly used near equator in hot climate cultures because it's used as a preservative for the food, the meat, and to keep it lasting longer. So it'll inhibit the growth of bacteria. That's why their food's spicier around there. And they have to eat these spicy foods due to survival. And we look back at medieval times and why we're expanding to Columbus getting to America. He was looking for a direct route to China, an easier route, and hoping to get spices. People want spices, so they can, they need this to survive. And the Indian in India averages 10 spices per recipe versus Finland, which is not near the equator, 2 spices per recipe. So we can see just location plays a role. And then we looked at some point, I think we looked at this hereditary, influences your body type and your set point. But then we also can do some things that can shift this a little bit. And the set point's like your individual's weight thermostat, essentially, is where it's, set. And when the body falls below that set point, you have an increase in hunger. And ghrelin's that thing that, that chemical on the brain, the hormone that, increases your appetite and when you want food. And, sleep loss will lead to higher levels of ghrelin. So and leptin's the one that suppresses appetite. So we see these chemicals, and just looking at that stuff, I thought that was just something that I think we should include to make sure we have at least an introductory understanding of it. And then we can look into, speaking of our ancestors, body language. You got to look at language is relatively new when you're looking at the long game of human beings being around. And human beings have been around 200,000 years. In our body language, we communicate 65% of the time with nonverbal body language. And, it's considered a second language. Why not the first, you could ask, if it was around longer. Ancestors spent thousands of years without language. And, they believe language has been around only for 50,000 years. So for the first 150,000 years, there was really no language verbally, at least the in regards to the way it's system today, how much depth and how complex it is in many ways. And, you can look at nonverbal cues. When we're excited, our eyes dilate, they get bigger. It's automatic. And reason being is we want to let more in, and this is whenever we like what we see. This is why the eyes dilate. And then if we lack energy, the eyes, the pupils, they contract. And, this is just looking at, this is just, you can stop it here and just look at, some body language things that happen. We can look at face, universal, and we can look at this no matter where you are in the world. You can see that these different faces here, we can pick up non-verbally what's going on here for the most part. Some of these would probably be a little more difficult, like confusion. I think that'd be a tough one. But the other ones I think seem pretty easy to tell where we're at. Now, this kind of goes along with Bacon's statement, but looking at, we have this rage for order. We want things nice and neat. If I do this, I get that. But there's a lot more chaos in the world. And look at like flipping a coin. You flip heads 3 times. What are you betting on's next one? Well, you need to remind yourself you have a 50-50 shot every time. It doesn't change. It can be another head. Doesn't have to be tails. So we have this rage for order and different things. But we need to remind ourselves that this often leads to us overestimating our intuition. And, we can also look at this rage for order. Remind yourself when an event that happens 1 in a billion people every day occurs about 7 times a day, 2,000 times a year, because there's 7 billion people in the world. So we have to look at that those events that we're like, wow, that's a 1 in a billion chance, no way. That happens 7 times a day. And, you can look at, these things, seemingly random chances, or, you look at cards being dealt. If you have 5 cards, there you go. You have this 1 in 2,598,960 chance to have the same exact cards the second time around. And that odds doesn't change. Just because you get one hand doesn't mean the next one won't be the same. It's just the odds don't change. Just kind of remind yourself of that. I just think it's important to look at. We can look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we need to remind ourselves, we talked about this, that we have to meet our bottom needs before we meet our full potential. And this is just Maslow is reinforcing that, and how we need our physiological needs met before we get our safety, then our belongingness and esteems and self-actualizations, that full potential. There's actually a newer one, it's self-transcendence. It's for us to have our legacy go off in the future after we're gone. Speaking of body language, just remind yourself that your body tells your mind sometimes what you're doing. This is why I have check those shoulders at the door, walk in confident, not only because people are judging you because of heuristics, but also because of the fact that you want to bring energy into your body. So you want to stand up tall. You want to kind of own your space. And whenever you have bad posture next part of your life, just know, A, people are judging you as maybe lacking confidence or energy, which means they don't really want you in a cave with them. They don't want to share a cave with you. But two, also, it lowers your level of energy in the brain. Also remind yourself that, we talk about these things. We talk about psychology. In the West and East, there are two different ways. The East focuses more on group, be more of a sociology, I guess, approach. And, it's more about we, where the West is more about the I. And we think we are the center of attention. And just kind of understand that when we're looking at different things, that we from different cultures will judge things differently psychologically, and what we see and what we think, depending on the environment we're brought into. So that was something interesting. And then stress and anxiety. Just remember the difference between fear and anxiety is fear is known, anxiety is unknown. So it's sometimes difficult to attack the root of the problem. But we need to kind of find ways, I guess, to be anxious in the right way, find ways to use it to motivate us to get things done. And, anxiety is just it's a mechanism in the body, our brain trying to tell us, something's amiss. And we need to, find hopefully the root of this anxiety to see if we can, shy away from it and better ourselves. Now, catharsis. This is, I'm watching TV. I just see this word thrown around quite a bit. Catharsis is that the venting. If you're really angry, you want to go hit weights. You want to punch a punching bag. You want to go yell at somebody or yell at top of your lungs, like releasing that pent-up anger. And I've seen, again, two sides of this, that does release. Some psychologists argue it helps release that tension, makes you feel better, getting that stuff out. Other people say it promotes, some psychologists argue it actually promotes more anger and aggression. And it snowballs and it actually becomes worse. And this is catharsis, is how that is with that. It's CATHARSIS. Now, looking at the next part, remind yourself that social status is very important for human beings, and it takes less than 1/10 of a second before we start judging people. People are judging you based off your appearance, just like that. We can look at Zimbardo and how people who are dressed in the prison uniforms will think that those dressed in the police uniforms are bigger than what they actually are. And this status is something that we kind of aspire towards, one high status, because people want us part of their cave when we get that high status, and we're status seeking creatures. And looking at that now, looking at status as well, we have this brand loyalty. We attach ourselves to a brand, whether you consciously or think about it or not. A lot of stuff is unconscious, but we have this brand loyalty because it kind of tells not who we are to ourselves, but we are able to tell others and our groups that we're smart, or we have a lot of money, or we have a lot of influence, or whatever it may be. We're part of this group as well, and this is that brand loyalty that we tend to gravitate towards. Again, it's a way to kind of reinforce that we're part of this group, and you should let us in the cave. Now, I thought this was cool. Dunbar's number. This just tells us that humans, we maintain about 150 relationships. It's kind of like the max. After that, we can't go on past 150, and I'll show you guys a video of that. Kind of captures that, reinforce that, TED Talk possibly. And then we remind ourselves that we are social beings. And, we are not really individuals because we were built over billions of years, not billions of years, billions of people, and we're connected. And when we have this social equilibrium that we want, this is why we want to be, we don't really want to stand out. We're afraid to stand out because we want to be part of the group. This is why, seemingly, when we introduce ourselves at class, you guys are probably all guilty of it. Hi, my name is Eric Brickwood. Hi, my name is, and we kind of have that monotone. We say the same exact thing because we don't want to stand out from the group, because we want to be part of the group. So it's just something like that. So that's that kind of idea that we want to conform, to be part of. And again, we reinforce the fact that world's a stage. We want to, act on that stage and be part of that stage, and we wear different masks as a way to kind of play a certain role, and we change this role out depending on where we're at. And certain environments cast us in a different mask versus, it's like my teacher mask versus my parent mask versus my husband mask, versus my son mask versus my friend mask versus my acquaintance mask. So we wear these different masks, and in the context of the environment we're in plays a role in what mask we wear. And, again, it's not to say we're phony or we're fake. It's just that different contexts, different environments, pressure us to wear different masks. And it's not to say you're totally different. It's just you are going to use maybe different vocabulary, or you may dress differently, whatever it may be. And this is just to play an important role. And again, people, give, certain, credence to people who are dressed up. And they that status, that person must be somebody of, influence, and somebody maybe I want to have in the cave. And we need to remind ourselves that our persona is derived from person. It's a Latin word, and that the whole world is a stage. But at the same time, we are somebody who is going to play these different roles, while we're on that stage. But we're all flawed, and just kind of remind yourself of that. And we wear different masks. Now, willpower, just talked about that. It's not a skill. We need to find ways to take ourselves from environments that are going to trigger us to take the Oreos or the Snickers bars, keep those things out of sight. They tend to stay out of mind. And then we looked at unintentional blindness. We've already talked about this. We had the gorilla walk by through the room. That things are hidden in plain sight. We don't see them. And this goes back to, the fact that we have selective attention. And, I'll give you a riddle real quick. You're a bus driver. And at first stop, 8 people get on board. Second stop, 4 get off, and 11 get on. At the third stop, 2 get off and 6 get on. At the fourth stop, 13 get off and 1 gets on. At the fifth stop, 5 get off and 3 get on. At the sixth stop, 3 get off and 2 get on. What color are the bus driver's eyes? And you can try to figure that out. But we look at that. We're not paying attention. This is an unintentional blindness. You get somebody with a riddle. And the problem is, it goes back to selective attention, that we're only consciously aware of so much. Our brain has to get path least resistance. We can only focus in on, so much information at one time. This goes back to that our human brain takes in 11 million bits of information every second, but is aware of only 40. That just shows us how much stuff we're missing. We're looking at that. Also known as the cocktail party effect, that, we can sit and, block out all that background noise until we hear our name called and we're like, whoa, what was that? What are they talking about? Why are they talking about me? And there's another thing. It's a video that I think we watched, and then this just kind of shows us an intentional blindness as well. And this is why, and I just want to make sure that we kind of remind ourselves here that 28% of traffic accidents occur while talking or texting on cell phones, and cell phone users are 4 times more likely to get in a wreck. Riding with friends is 1.6 times more likely to get in a wreck, while texting and driving is 23 times more likely to wreck. And almost 80% of crashes involve driver distraction. So just make sure you're careful out there this summer. Understand you're not invincible and you're not great drivers. And then when you text or talk on top of that, and it can be much more catastrophic. And I'm going to pause this here. I think I got a little bit of time. Hold on. I'll go here. And then we talked about the primacy effect versus the recency effect. Remembering names, recalling names. We're able to remember the beginning and the end. At that middle, if we're recalling names or watching a movie, a show, remember the beginning and the end more so sometimes than the middle. So this is just understand that this plays a role when you're whether you're shopping list, you remember the beginning and end because you look at it more times than not. Flashbulb memory, there's just those memories that stand out. They really make an impact. Understand the anchoring effect. I thought this was just cool, just making sure you understand. A lot of stores use this. Every store uses this. And, we depend on anchors throughout the day to predict outcomes of events. And we use anchors to compare, in stores, for example. So this is whenever you're looking at, shirts, you see these, or phones, they have these high rate on one phone, then there's a middle phone, then there's a cheap phone. And what they put that high phone, they price it so high as an anchoring effect. It triggers your mind to say that, you know what? Who buys that phone? I'm just gonna buy the middle. They use that as an anchor to try to get you to buy that mid-level phone, not the cheap one. And they do that in stores with cell phones or clothes. And they don't even plan on selling the one that's really pricey. So they'll get you. I mean, they'd love for you to buy it, but they don't plan on it. They want you to buy that one underneath of it. And they do that with wine as well. And just anchor effect. Just understand it plays a role. Jealousy. Just understand it's human nature. You're going to be jealous. You're going to be envious of people. We don't like to show that, especially in relationships, because we're saying that person's better than us, or they're more attractive than us, or they're funnier than us, or whatever it may be. So we don't like to show it. We kind of try to hide that somewhat. We try to say, I don't like that person because they're too loud, or they dress like that, or whatever. When it's jealousy, and we're trying not to tell ourselves that we're really jealous, because again, if we tell ourselves that, people are going to pick up that we're jealous. So we try to suppress that jealousy best we can. But just understand that you are going to be envious of people. I tell my own children that you're going to be jealous of people. It's human nature. And you'll be jealous of your friends, and you'll be, teachers are jealous of other teachers, and lawyers are jealous of other lawyers, and doctors are jealous of other doctors. So just understand that it's human nature. And this comparison is a universal human trait. They say the comparison's a thief of joy. If you're comparing yourself to somebody who has something more than you and you want, you are going to, be hurt by that possibly. Or you're just, it's a trigger to maybe work harder to go get that, or find ways to go get that. But also comparison can bring joy. If you're comparing somebody beneath you, and when I mean beneath you, somebody who has a harder situation maybe than you, it could trigger you to actually appreciate what you do have. So understand jealousies. I'm going to stop it here. We're going to talk about biases. We're going to talk about fallacies. We're going to talk about effects. And this unit will be closed down for, I guess, this part. I'm going to have you guys look into some stuff. So I'm going to stop it there.